Let me describe a situation and tell me if this sounds familiar. You find a role that actually fits, not just close enough. It genuinely aligns with your background, your experience, your level. You read through the description and you think, this is a real match. So you put in the work, you tailor the resume, you make sure everything lines up, and you apply. And then you wait. A few days go by, nothing. A week passes, still nothing. And at some point, whether it's day 10 or day 14, a question starts to settle in. What actually happened to my application? Not the version companies put in their automated confirmation emails. Not, we appreciate your interest and we'll be in touch. The real answer. What was actually happening inside that organization after you click submit. That's what this video is all about. I'm going to walk you through the entire process, step by step, so that you can finally understand where your application actually goes, what decisions are being made along the way, and why things often go quiet without any explanation. Because there are real reasons behind the silence. And once you understand them, this whole process starts to make a lot more sense. If you want to understand how hiring actually works, not the polished version companies put on their career pages, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. That's what we do on this channel. If we haven't met yet, my name is Chuks Agada. Most people know me as Dr. A. I'm an executive career coach and also an executive recruiter, which means I've been on the inside of this process. I've watched thousands of applications come through. I've seen hiring managers change direction in the middle of each search. I've seen roles get filled before most of the applicant pool was ever reviewed. So what I'm going to share today isn't theory. This is what it actually looks like from the other side of the table. One thing before we get into it, if you're a senior level professional, a director, VP, or at the executive level, there are parts of this process that work very differently for you. I'll speak to that specifically as we go through this. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The very first thing that happens after you apply has nothing to do with a recruiter, nothing to do with a hiring manager. It's the system. Your resume gets pulled into an applicant tracking system, an ATS. And depending on how that company has it set up, your resume either gets parsed and scored automatically, or it goes into a queue waiting for a recruiter to open it. Here's what most people don't realize. Submitting your application does not mean someone is looking at it right now. In some cases, not today. In some cases, not at all. Here's a scenario that plays out more often than you think. A role gets posted. Within the first 48 hours, 150 people apply. A recruiter gets in there, starts screening, and finds 8 or 10 strong candidates pretty quickly. They move those names forward. The process starts moving. You applied on day 4. Solid background, real experience. But by then, the pipeline is already in motion. You weren't rejected. You weren't screened out. You just got caught behind the momentum of a process that didn't wait for you. And that's the first thing I want you to understand about this. Timing matters. Now, let's say your resume does get pulled up. Here's what that moment actually looks like. The recruiter is not carefully reading through your work history. They're scanning quickly. They're looking for a few key signals, right level of experience, right industry, right positioning for what the hiring manager asked for. And that judgment is happening in seconds, not minutes, seconds. Here's what makes it harder. You're not being evaluated on your own. You're being compared against a stack of other people at the same time. So the question isn't just, does this person qualify? The question is, does the person stand out compared to who else I'm looking at right now? Qualified gets you considered. It doesn't get you selected. There's a difference. This is the part of the conversation that's a little bit uncomfortable. But it's important. Not every job posting represents a truly open seat. In some cases, by the time that role hits the job board, the company already has someone in mind, an internal candidate, a referral, someone who came up in a conversation before the search ever went public. But the role still gets posted. Sometimes that's internal policy, sometimes it's compliance requirement. For example, companies doing business with the federal government often fall under OFCCP guidelines, which can require that positions be posted publicly for a minimum period of time, even when there's already a strong internal direction. So from where you're sitting, you're applying to an open opportunity. From where they're sitting, the decision may already be leaning somewhere specific. You have no way of knowing that, and it has nothing to do with your qualifications. It's just the reality of how some of these processes are structured. I want to stay on the timing piece for a moment because I think it's one of the most underestimated factors in all of this. Hiring moves fast when there's urgency behind it. A role opens Monday. By Wednesday, a recruiter has already done initial screens with several candidates. By Friday, a shortlist is forming. Interviews are being scheduled for the following week. You apply Thursday. Strong fit, good experience. But the process didn't wait. This is why people feel like they're submitting applications into a black hole. It's not always that something was wrong with your resume. Sometimes you were a few days behind a search that was already well underway. This is one of the things I help people understand. Being early in the process matters just as much as being qualified for one. Now, I'm curious about something, and I want you to be honest. At what point do you start assuming a role is a no? Is it after a few days with no response, a week, or is it when you see the same job reposted like nothing happened? Drop your answer in the comments because that moment, whenever it hits you, says a lot about how this process actually feels from your side of it. And it's something I think more people should talk about. Now, here's something that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with what's happening inside the company. Organizations shift direction all the time. You apply for a role, 2 weeks later, leadership decides a different hire is more urgent. Resources shift, the team's attention moves, and the search you applied for, it just slows down. Nobody updates the posting, nobody sends you a note. The role might still be live on their careers page, but internally, nobody's working on it. And in the worst version of this, it doesn't just slow down, it gets paused entirely. Budget changes, a restructure happens, someone in leadership decides they're not sure they actually need to fill that seat anymore. Eventually, you either hear nothing or you get that standard email. Thank you for your interest. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Which sounds like a rejection, but what it actually means is we moved on, and this is the only way we know how to close the loop. This one I want you to pay close attention to. Even when you do everything right, you match the keywords, you align your experience, you get past the ATS, your resume gets reviewed, there are still things working against you that you never had access to. Every role has what's written in the job description, and then there's what's not written. Let me give you a real example of what I mean. The posting says 15 or more years of commercial experience in healthcare IT. You have that. You meet the requirement. What the posting doesn't say is that the hiring manager and her leadership team want someone who has direct hands-on experience working with a specific type of client, maybe a particular competitor, a specific reachable market, a certain account size. Why isn't that in the description? Maybe the recruiter missed it during the intake conversation with the hiring team. Maybe they didn't want to narrow the talent pool too early. Maybe it's a preference that's developed as they started seeing candidates and realized more clearly what they were actually looking for. But internally, that becomes the filter. And if you don't match it, you're out. Even if everything on paper said that you were in, this is one of the biggest reasons I always tell people you cannot rely on the job description alone. Those unwritten requirements usually only come out in conversation, which means your network, your relationships, and your visibility in that space matter more than most people want to admit. Now, if you're a director, VP, or at the executive level, I want to speak to you specifically for a moment. At that level, the process I've been describing still applies, but there's another layer underneath it. By the time a senior level search gets launched, conversations have often already started in the background. Hiring managers are asking their networks. Executive search firms are being briefed. Names are being surfaced through relationships long before a single application comes in. A shortlist can start forming before the role is ever publicly posted. So if you've been applying to senior roles and wondering why you're not getting traction, it may not be about your application. It may be that the process at that level isn't primarily driven by who applies. It's driven by who gets surfaced. That doesn't mean that you stop applying. It means your strategy has to go beyond applying. Your network, your visibility, your positioning in the market, those things carry weight at the senior level in a way that's hard to overstate. Here's what I want you to take away from this. You didn't go unheard because you weren't qualified. In many cases, you got caught in a process with a lot more moving parts than anyone ever explains to you. Internal candidates, shifting priorities, unwritten requirements, timing, None of those things are a reflection of your value, but knowing they exist, that changes how you approach this. Now you know what's actually happening behind the scenes. Use it. If what I'm sharing today is starting to shift how you see this process, good. That's the point. Into strategy like this at careercalibration.co. That's where you'll find resources built specifically for professionals who want to navigate that system, not just react to it. And I'll put a link below. And if you haven't watched these 2 videos yet, make sure you do. The first one is why your resume gets rejected before a human sees it. And the other one is how recruiters actually decide who gets the interview. Together with this video, those give you the full picture from the moment your resume enters the system to how it gets evaluated to everything that happens in between. Watch those next. And finally, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe and comment below. See you next time. Over and out.